happy to see you. And it's such an
Hi.
honor for me to be moderating this session. To introduce myself briefly, I am Ruam, currently head of digital asset at SCBX, which is the largest financial group in Thailand. We are also the holding company for Siam Commercial Bank, Thailand's oldest bank, as well as SCB10X, which is the organizer of Redefine 2026. Let's jump straight into the questions, which I'm super excited about. I think to start off, could you briefly introduce Korea and the kind of governance problems you have spent the most time trying to make visible? And from that vantage point that you have, what is the first sign that a DAO looks active on paper but is actually weak in practice?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction again. I'm glad to be here to be talking about this topic as well. A little bit about Curia Lab. So we are a governance and analytics firm based in Southeast Asia. The simplest way to put it is that we sit on both sides of the tables. We are an active delegates in these systems, and also, we also build tools that measure them. So we do two things. First, we sit as a delegate across 16 protocols, including Compound, Optimism, Uniswap, 1inch, Arbitrum, Simplify, Safe, Obo, and many others. This means we are voting and writing rational every week across these very different governance systems. And also, second, we build analytics infrastructure for those DAOs that we rely on. So we build governance and delegate dashboard for the protocols I mentioned earlier, and we also built a more specialized systems. And for example, the on-chain attestation engine for the top optimism delegates, and also the delegate reputation score system for OBOL, which is now integrated into the governance staking program. The governance problems we spend the most time on is on the gap between the activity and accountability. So what's visible on the forum or on the vote tracker versus what's actually informing decisions. To second your questions earlier, mm, I think the first sign I look for is whether the proposal pipeline is being shaped by a more handful of people, and or in other words, the deliberation process and in most style voting happens. Dashboard lights up, forum looks busy, but when you trace where the actually proposal actually originate from and who's drafting them, you can see pretty much uh, who's responding to the comments and who's shaping the final version. So it usually collapses to a handful of people, very small set of participants, and at the end of the vote is at the end part is just the visible part. But I think the real governance actually happens several weeks before, all the discussion that happens, and I think that's always where the system is thinnest. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. To tell like a simple DAO can have a very high participation rate, and still be authored by a couple of people. Activity is loud, but authorship is quiet. So I think, yeah, where I actually look at is the authorship and yeah.
Yeah, and just following up on that, I think you mentioned a little bit about participation, forum activity, delegate rankings. Like from my understanding, these are some of the default shorthand for governance quality. But, where do these metrics actually hold up and where do they, are just theater or yeah, I would love to hear your view on that.
For sure. I think there's a useful distinction that I draw between metrics that diagnosis and metrics that perform. So for example, forum activity, word turnout, delegate rankings, these hold up when you use them to ask a question. So for example, is participation concentrating over time, or the forum responses coming from and the actual people, or there's just, some more like noises, sharing, stuff, or or are the vote margins narrowing, especially when the proposal is very contested. Use that way. I think the the metrics can be genuinely useful. So they point you towards like where to look closer at. And I think they cross into the data moments when they're used to assert legitimacy instead of examine it. So when a DAO, like for example, they report, hey, we have a very high percentage turnout, it's a success proposals, and without asking whether that high percentage was an informed decisions. I mean, that's pretty much for me. It's a data. So the number is standing in for accountability without doing any work of that work. I think good example for this is delegate ranking themselves. So I'll be also self-critical here since we also built these. The standard for these delegate leaderboards rank people by voting frequency and like participation rate. But a delegate who votes on every single proposal isn't necessarily means they're good delegates. They might be auto voting with the majority, pretty much, or like rubber stamping, without actually really read the proposal or the issue into that. So we literally watch delegates optimize for these rankings, because some of these rankings affects how they're getting paid as well, and voting on everything to just to keep their participation on a high score, which is a metrics which the metric itself can actively producing a worse behavior outcome for the organization, for the DAO. So for me, I think the moment people try to optimize for the measure, I mean the measure itself stop measuring the things you care about. And I think the cleanest tell here is these numbers can be theater, which is the turnout itself. So like most DAO reports turn out as the share of voting power that participated, but isn't like the voting power. But let me frame that again. But the voting power itself isn't the people, right? So a single large holders or delegates could move the number as much as like several thousands of people from the small ones. And so a DAO can report a healthy turnout, voting turnout, why the actual decisions was actually being made by a handful of wallets, maybe those different wallets are even from the same entity, and yeah, the metrics look like a crowd where the reality is more like a room, like a small room of people, and yeah, that's really the heart of it. And the theater isn't how we count votes. I think we are like a lot of it's in the mistaking the act of voting itself for the substance of the governance.
Mm. I see. Yeah, thank you for that. And I do understand that you yourself have tried to tackle some of the things that you mentioned earlier. And for example, I understand Curia built an on-chain DRS, which is the Delegate Reputation Score system for OVO. And this is now integrated into OVO's governance staking to get and align the delegate behavior with incentives for both delegators and delegates. Working on the systems like this. And from your experience, what have you learned about the difference between making governance more legible and actually making it better, which can be two separate things, I presume?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. I think the question, and pretty much this question itself is where we spend most of our time on, and because the answer is easy, that visibility creates accountability. I mean, this itself turned out to be wrong. I think the clearest version of the problem, a lot of DAO uh, pays delegates based on participation rates, or pretty much they have like high voting power, and you pass minimum requirements, but you pay them based on how active they are. So if they hit a high enough voting rate, you get compensated, and the visibility is the total. Everyone can see this rate. It's right on the dashboard, but the if you look at the behavior it produces, delegates vote on everything to protect the red themselves, and whether or not they actually read the proposals, the measurement is fully legible, but I think it's rewarding the wrong thing, and it pays for it just pays for showing up, but not the actual judgment itself. And I think that's the trap we keep running into. So we built initially we only built the governance dashboard, since Curia started. And all these protocols, every one of these taught us that pretty much the same thing. So a dashboard makes governance legible, but legibility on its own doesn't change. It changes almost nothing. Like it's and also like sometimes it also makes things worse, because people just optimize for what is being shown, to build up their reputation without actually owning their decisions. So I think what actually changed the behavior itself is when these measurements is being used, is being applied to the right consequence. So we actually learned this to think about this as a ladder. So the first round here is the dashboard itself. So pretty much it tells who's active, which is useful but pretty much inert. The second run step here is so for example, we built the optimism attestation system. So we built it to issue a dynamic on-chain attestation to top delegates based on observable governance behavior. Once something is attested on-chain, it stops being just a number of leaderboards and become a verifiable claim on-chain, which some other system can build on top of it. For example, you can use this as a layer to actually give these most trusted delegates more weight on the decision that matter the most. So you actually use it to improve the government process, like allowing these top delegates to approve, for example, security council member, which is a very important component to help secure the protocol themselves. And lastly, the third ladder, which pretty much you touched a bit during question, is the overall the delegate reputation score. This is, I think, it's not the score itself that matters. Implementation of it, governance staking system, and the delegate reputation score, itself gates and shape the incentives that flows to the delegates and to the people who's delegated to them. So the score isn't just observational anymore, but it decides who earned what, and it changes the outcome. And I think that's the difference between some the things that is legible and better, like in 3 steps. So like earlier, dashboard tell you who's active, and attestation itself turn that back into the into a fact that the network can trust, and pretty much a portable reputation. And the reputation system itself, when it's tied to real economic incentives, it makes the behavior actually matters to the person actually doing it. And the honest lesson is that the measurement infrastructure is necessary, but nowhere near sufficient. And if you look at it, governance only get better when the measure itself is being used, to wind to those incentive surface that the delegates or delegators or pretty much anybody, the participant themselves, actually responding to. And until you make that link, I think you pretty much build what you build is that surveillance without accountability itself in the system.
So if a DAO says that it wants better accountability, what should it actually measure first, in your opinion? Is it delegate responsiveness? Is it decision quality? Is it participation breadth, or is it something else entirely? And why would you give those suggestions to a DAO?
Mm. Okay, let me take the options in terms, because you mentioned some of the things. I think also because some of these options you mentioned are the easy picks, but usually they're usually the wrong ones. For example, the participation breadth and delegate responsiveness. These are like very tempting answer. They're easy to instrument, to measure, and they feel like a real accountability. You're very responsive. You're always active. But I think these themselves are more of like a surrogates. So you can have a DAO with a very high presentation out and highly responsive delegate that is still making consistently bad decisions because nothing in those metrics asks whether those decisions were any good. Right? So they measure the activity of the governing, but not the quality of it. And so if I have to pick one, I think it's the decision quality, and specifically the quality of the inputs at the moment of when a decision get made. Here's also what makes it hard, and also why it's the right answer. Because the decision quality isn't a number you can read off chain. Like you have to instrument it deliberately. Like, I mean, asking of every proposal, did it include a baseline? What are the actual? What are we actually starting from? Did it specify what success looked like in a measurable terms? And did it also consider some other alternatives, or is this the like the options that the only option that anyone wrote down, or and when delegates voted, did they leave a rational grounded in the proposals, or did they just first vote and like just reason better to make it fit whatever they voted for? And almost like no DAO tracks any of that, and they track what happens after the decisions. The vote split, the turnout, what else? Maybe the treasury impact itself, if they're lucky, and I think a lot of them do as well. But those are all downstream of the decisions, whose the quality was never examined, and so to put it in a short, you're pretty much measuring the echo, but not the sound itself. And and the reason I did start with decision quality rather than the other is that it sits upstream of everything. A healthy turnout number, uh, a clean vote split, a well tracked treasury outflow. None of those means anything if the decision they attached to it was wrong, and you can just be executing a bad decision very efficiently, and carefully measuring how smoothly it went. But get the decision quality right first, and all those other numbers can finally be something have something real attached to it. Get it wrong, you build pretty much a a beautiful dashboard around, I guess. Yeah, so pretty much.
And while I'm listening to your answers around, performance and accountability and decision quality, I think it just really reminds me of, like the similar issues that more centralized governance settings have to face because I'm from a more corporate background, but I think ultimately both like DAO or like companies are trying to solve the same goals of coordination and resource mobilization. So given your expertise on DAO governance measurability, what insights do you think that they could be applied to corporate or more centralized settings, and are there parallels to be drawn from your opinion?
I think, wow, I think that's a great question. Uh, I think the real parallels here, and the interesting part is that the lesson runs in the opposite direction from what people did expect. But the usual assumption is that DAOs are the immature ones, and there should be learning governance from like established companies. But that partly true, and I think a lot of what DAOs are slowly rediscovering as well is just corporate practices. Having a clear mandate, track budget, review performance. These recent research, there's several research recently that frames DAO governance exactly this way, and needing it, framing it, the DAO itself needing to adopt the business intelligence disciplines from like mature companies already have. But I think the more interesting trends will run the other way as well, because like you asked earlier, DAOs uh, out of necessity have been experimenting with accountability mechanisms. Most corporates have never tried as well. So let me give some example. Uh, right now, I can pretty much on top of my head take three of them. One is the public rationale itself. So in a well-run DAO, when the decision maker, like pretty much the delegate votes, they are expected to explain why publicly on the record permanently, like compared to like the corporate board, where decisions usually get made behind closed doors, and the minutes of meetings itself are sanitized. And imagine like what would it be like if every board members has to uh, archive, or maybe not publicly yet, but like archive these dialogue and reasonings on every major decisions they make. Anyone, after certain amount of a year, of course, maybe just for competitive reasons, they could people could go back. The public could go back 2 years later and check whether the logic actually held up, and I think that's the one norm that could change the quality of decisions, because you decide differently when you will be on the record. The second example, I think, is the continuous accountability. A shareholder can really, pretty much act once or twice a year, at the annual or biannual meetings, when in the companies in these stocks markets. But with the how DAO is being run, the token holder themselves can actually pull their delegated voting power away from those underperforming decision makers or the delegate themselves in the same afternoon after they make something really controversial and they didn't support it. And I think that's a much tighter loop between performance and consequences. And if there's something, I don't know what it's going to be like, but if there's something equivalent for these corporate governance with I think if you compare them, it's with the annual cycles, it's something that corporate governance structurally lacks. And the third thing I would say might be the most useful one, because it's a mistake both traditional corporates and also DAOs makes, or that corporate themselves also are drowning in like dashboards. They have come forward on the like business intelligence side, than any DAO will ever have, and but some of them they still fell into exactly the same track where we've been talking about earlier. So a KPI that everyone can see, but isn't tied to any real consequences, or like or behavior consequences that changes behavior. Just as little inside a Fortune 500 as it does in like any like DAO. And I think measurement on its own is just a surveillance, and it only becomes a governance when it's wired to something that is actually bites, and that's true whether you're running a protocol or like a company. And yeah, now the honest caveat here, I think DAO aren't just DAO itself aren't the governance success story overall. They're very new, they're very experimental. You can see like participation is still very low. The power capture between these are real, and most don't last very long. Like some fail badly as well. And I'm not saying companies should become DAO, but I am saying the opposite of what you did expect. So that most centralized organization in the world could still learn something from watching how these open public experiments in accountability play out, and some of them fails in ways that are genuinely instructive. It's you can learn from them. Yeah, pretty much.
And in that vein of growth and maturing, and just to end our session in a more forward-looking tone, my last question to you would be, looking ahead 12 months, what would convince you that DAO governance is becoming more than participation and just signaling, but it's starting to become more like a dependable operating system for capital and coordination? Yeah.
Interesting question. Honestly, what will convince me uh, is very concrete, I think. So it's whether DAO start to remember. Right now, like governance mostly forgets, like to be honest. So like for example, when a decision get made and when a similar issue come up a year later, maybe on a different DAO, but even within the same one, it gets debates from scratch as if like this is the first time that this ever happened. Right? So like to put it through like a profit sentence, like there's no institutional memory layer. Like so the thing the first thing I'm watching for is what you might call like a governance memory, like a structured retrospective, a post implementation reviews, a real record of not just what was decided, but why and how it turned out and how it actually turned out. Yeah. So like a DAO that can show how it's making better decisions this year than last year and show you the trail of why and is behaving like a real operating system for capital, like not just like a voting venue. I think that's very things I'm looking forward to. And the second thing is also whether these like reputations start to travel as well. Like today, a delegate track record at one protocol, like for example, Compound, doesn't follow to like other governance or like ecosystem, which you can say like somewhat have a very transitional skills. But if reputation become portal and verifiable across these protocols, that tells me the industry itself also treating it as more of accountability infrastructure, no, not just like some decoration. You some hey, I'm this guy, but you can't really uh, if it's not composable. Yeah, and I think the last thing that I'm watching most closely, and I'll be honest as well, is where Curia is also heading next, is whether everything we learn about delegate accountability start to apply to the newest set of actors, especially in DeFi's. For example, risk creators. So in Morpho, RV4 spokes, and what it's also starting to go this way. For example, the compound V4, the upcoming ones. You have people taking real discretion over decisions over real capital, billions of dollars behind it, and on behalf of depositors who mostly can't evaluate what they're doing. And I think it's the same principal agent problems governance has always had, and except now there's an actual money on the line, like more direct money on the line, instead of just like votes, like some of this protocol. And I think the open question is whether the industry built a real accountability infrastructures for these creators, reputation, attestation, oversight, or whether it's just let them operate on trust and brand until like something breaks, right? So yeah, so if I have to so share what I would leave people with is that when the day a DAO can show its own memory, the day delegates reputation travel across protocol, and the day the curator running billions is held at the same standard we hold for all these important institutional corporates. That is when this stop being an experiment and start being a real infrastructure for capital and coordination. And I don't expect the whole space to get there in like 12 months. But I expect, there's like some first credible good examples, and that's enough to make me optimistic about the industry.
And that's a great ending to our session. Thank you so much, Varit, for today. I learned so much. Thank you so much again for the great session.
Yeah. Thank you again, Rom, for being the moderator. Happy to be here, and yeah, looking forward what's coming next in our industry.
Thank you.